Akame's eyes snapped open, her pupils dilating as they adjusted to the dim, pulsating light that seemed to emanate from the very walls surrounding her. She found herself lying on a cold, damp floor, the surface beneath her fingers slick with a substance she dared not identify. As she pushed herself up, her hand sank into the yielding surface, eliciting a sickening squelch. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant, rhythmic throbbing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The corridor before her stretched into darkness, its walls glistening with a viscous, crimson fluid that oozed and flowed like living tissue. Akame's mind raced, desperately trying to piece together how she had ended up in this nightmarish place. The last thing she remembered was a mission gone wrong, a trap sprung by an unknown enemy. Now she found herself in a labyrinth that defied logic and sanity. As she took her first tentative steps forward, the floor beneath her feet seemed to pulse, as if alive and reacting to her presence. The walls writhed and shifted, forming grotesque patterns that resembled faces twisted in agony. Akame's hand instinctively went to her side, seeking the comforting presence of her sword, Murasame. To her relief, it was still there, its cursed blade humming with dark energy. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the corridor, causing Akame to freeze in her tracks. The sound was filled with such raw terror and anguish that it sent shivers down her spine. Without hesitation, she sprinted towards the source of the cry, her assassin's instincts kicking in. As she rounded a corner, Akame came face to face with a sight that made her blood run cold. A young girl with short, dark hair and silver eyes was backed against a wall, her red cloak torn and stained with blood. Before her stood a monstrous creature, a twisted amalgamation of human and beast, its body a patchwork of mismatched limbs and pulsating organs. The girl, Ruby, Akame's mind supplied, though she couldn't recall how she knew the name, was wielding a massive scythe, its blade gleaming in the eerie light. Ruby's eyes were wide with terror, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as she faced down the abomination before her. Without a moment's hesitation, Akame drew Murasame and lunged at the creature. Her blade sliced through putrid flesh with ease, sending a spray of black ichor across the walls. The monster let out an inhuman shriek, its multiple limbs flailing wildly as it turned to face this new threat. Ruby, seizing the opportunity, swung her scythe in a wide arc, severing several of the creature's appendages. The two warriors moved in perfect synchronization, their weapons a blur of steel and silver as they tore into their shared enemy. As the last pieces of the monstrosity fell to the ground, twitching and dissolving into a puddle of foul-smelling liquid, Akame and Ruby locked eyes. For a moment, relief washed over them both, a fleeting sense of camaraderie in the face of the horrors that surrounded them. "Thank you," Ruby said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know where I am or how I got here. Everything's so wrong." Akame nodded, her crimson eyes scanning their surroundings warily. "We're in the same situation. This place, it's not natural. We need to find a way out." As they spoke, the walls of the labyrinth began to shift once more, the blood-like substance flowing more rapidly. The corridor they had just come from sealed itself off, leaving them with only one path forward. "We should stick together," Ruby suggested, gripping her scythe tightly. "Safety in numbers, right?" Akame hesitated for a moment, years of training as a lone assassin making her wary of trusting anyone. But in this nightmarish realm, an ally, even a temporary one, could mean the difference between survival and a fate worse than death. "Agreed," she said finally. "But stay alert. This place, it feels like it's trying to get inside our heads." As they ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the horrors they encountered grew increasingly disturbing. Walls pulsed with veins of pulsating energy, floors became treacherous pools of quicksand-like flesh, and the very air seemed to whisper dark secrets and forgotten memories. Ruby found herself reliving moments from her past, the loss of her mother, the fears of inadequacy that plagued her at Beacon Academy. Each memory twisted and distorted, becoming a grotesque parody of reality. She saw her teammates, Yang, Weiss, and Blake, their bodies broken and mangled, accusing eyes staring at her with hatred and blame. "It's not real," she muttered to herself, squeezing her eyes shut. "It's all in your head, Ruby. Focus!" Beside her, Akame was fighting her own inner demons. The faces of her fallen comrades from Night Raid haunted her, their spectral forms reaching out with grasping, decaying hands. She saw Tatsumi, his body half transformed into a dragon, roaring in agony as he begged her to end his suffering. The labyrinth seemed to feed on their fears and regrets, growing stronger with each passing moment. As they turned another corner, they found themselves face to face with a nightmarish version of General Esdeath, her body a twisted fusion of ice and flesh, her cruel laugh echoing through the corridors. "Well, well," the abomination that wore Esdeath's face sneered. "Two little lambs lost in my maze. How delightful." Akame's grip on Murasame tightened, her eyes narrowing. "You're not real," she spat. "You're just another illusion." The Esdeath creature's laugh grew louder, more maniacal. "Oh, I'm very real, little Akame. As real as the guilt that eats away at your soul. How many have you killed? How much blood stains your hands?" Ruby glanced at Akame, seeing the conflict and pain in her eyes. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, her scythe at the ready. "We don't have time for your mind games," she shouted, her voice filled with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Either fight us or get out of our way." The creature's eyes narrowed, its form shifting and changing. Suddenly, it was no longer Esdeath standing before them, but a grotesque fusion of grim and human, its body a mass of bone-white armor and pulsating dark flesh. "Very well," it hissed, its voice a cacophony of growls and screams. "Let's see how you fare against your deepest fears made flesh." The battle that ensued was a nightmare of blood and terror. Ruby and Akame fought back to back, their weapons tearing through wave after wave of monstrosities. Each creature they faced seemed pulled from their worst nightmares, grim fused with the bodies of fallen friends. Night Raid targets returned from the dead with vengeance in their eyes. As they fought, the labyrinth itself seemed to come alive around them. Walls closed in, trying to crush them, while the floor became a sea of grasping hands that sought to drag them down into the depths. The air grew thick with a choking miasma, each breath burning their lungs and clouding their minds. Hours seemed to pass, though time had no meaning in this hellish place. Ruby and Akame found themselves pushed to their physical and mental limits, their bodies covered in cuts and bruises, their minds fraying at the edges. Finally, they stumbled into a vast circular chamber, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected distorted versions of themselves. In the center stood a figure that made both warriors freeze in horror. It was a man, or what was left of a man. His body was a patchwork of mismatched parts, surgical scars crisscrossing his flesh. Tubes and wires protruded from his skin, pulsing with an unholy energy. His eyes, sunken and wild, fixed upon them with a mixture of madness and glee. "At last," he rasped, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "My perfect specimens have arrived." Akame stepped forward. Murasame pointed at the abomination before them. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What is this place?" The man's face split into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of sharpened teeth. "I am the architect of your suffering, the creator of this realm of nightmares. For years I have searched for the perfect warriors to complete my life's work. And now, here you are. Akame, the assassin with the cursed blade, and Ruby Rose, the prodigy with silver eyes." Ruby's grip on her scythe tightened, her silver eyes narrowing. "What do you want from us?" The man's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound of pure madness. "Want? I want to push you to your limits, to break you down and rebuild you as the ultimate weapons. Only one of you will survive this trial, and that survivor will become the vessel for my grand design." With a wave of his hand, the mirrors surrounding them shattered, each shard becoming a reflection of their past battles, their greatest fears, their deepest regrets. The fragments swirled around them, cutting into their flesh and assaulting their minds with a barrage of nightmarish visions. Akame and Ruby found themselves forced apart, each trapped in a personal hell of memory and illusion. They fought desperately against phantoms of their past, each victory feeling hollow as another enemy took its place. As the battle raged on, doubt began to creep into their minds. The mad scientist's words echoed in their thoughts, planting seeds of paranoia and distrust. What if only one of them could survive? What if the other was part of this cruel experiment all along? The chamber began to shrink, the walls closing in as the mirror shards swirled more violently. Akame and Ruby found themselves face to face once more, their weapons raised, eyes wild with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm sorry," Akame whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos around them. "But I can't die here. I have to survive, to atone for my sins." Ruby's silver eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "And I have to protect the people I love. I can't let it end like this." With a shared cry of anguish and resolve, they lunged at each other. Murasame's cursed edge clashed against the blade of Crescent Rose, sending sparks flying in all directions. The two warriors, pushed to the brink of sanity, fought with everything they had. Their battle was a brutal dance of steel and blood, each strike meant to kill, each dodge a desperate attempt to survive. The mad scientist watched from the sidelines, his eyes gleaming with twisted joy as his creations tore into each other. In the end, it was a single moment of hesitation that decided the outcome. Ruby, haunted by a vision of her sister Yang reaching out to her, faltered for just an instant. It was all the opening Akame needed. Murasame plunged into Ruby's chest, its curse activating instantly. Ruby's silver eyes widened in shock and pain, her body going rigid as the poison coursed through her veins. "I'm sorry," Akame repeated, her voice breaking as she caught Ruby's falling form. "I'm so sorry," as Ruby's body began to dissolve into rose petals. The true horror of the situation crashed down upon Akame. The labyrinth around her crumbled away, revealing a stark clinical laboratory filled with the bodies of countless failed experiments. The mad scientist approached, clapping his hands in perverse glee. "Magnificent," he crowed. "You truly are the perfect specimen, Akame. Now let us begin the next phase of your evolution." But Akame barely heard him. Her mind, fractured by the horrors she had endured and the weight of her actions, retreated into itself. As the scientist reached for her with grotesque, surgically altered hands, Akame's consciousness slipped away. In the depths of her broken psyche, Akame found herself standing in a field of corpses, the faces of all those she had killed, willingly or not, staring up at her with accusing eyes. And there, in the center of it all, lay Ruby's scythe, a silent testament to the final unforgivable sin she had committed. The last thing Akame heard before darkness claimed her was the mad scientist's laughter, a sound that would haunt whatever was left of her soul for eternity.